Welcome, everybody, to the Under the Hard Hat podcast here. Today we have Dr. John Gaal. John, thank you so much for being here to share your story and your son's story as well.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you reached out and provided me the time and space. It's much appreciated.
Of course, it's our pleasure. We'll get into a bit about your career, of course, but first we'd love to jump into John's Junior's story, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'd love to share. So John Jr. was a kind and funny, smart, strong, athletic kid. His entire life, he really was. In sum total, he was a creative, practical joker. He loved to cook for his family and friends. What I liked about him, he would fight for the underdog, whether it was on or off the field. He had a soft spot in his heart for unhoused populations. He tried to do a lot of work with them as much and often as he could. In the end, my wife, Mary, his mom, endearingly referred to him as a good mother faker.
Oh.
And what she meant by that was he never wanted others to see his pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so he always tried to make them laugh.
Oh, okay.
He was a good kid. And I knew the lessons that we taught him, over the course of his life stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Because at his funeral, nearly 1,000 people showed up. And, for somebody 24 years old, that's quite a statement, of friends and family and college roommates and so on and so forth. It really, it spoke volumes.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in a nutshell, that was pretty much him.
Amazing. Yeah, he sounds like an amazing person. And for those who don't know, part of the reason we're sharing this interview, your story today, what happened to John Jr.?
Yeah, so he played multiple sports in high school. He actually got special permission to play soccer and football in the same season. And he was a really good athlete. So he played both ways on football. He played as a running back on offense and as safety on defense. He was in almost the whole game. And in those two positions, you're getting hit almost every play. Plus, he played soccer, and he was center midfielder. He loved going up for head balls. And sadly, in his junior season, he had 2 concussions. And people hear that and they think immediately football. And I have to correct them. No, it was 1 from football and 1 from soccer. But more importantly, in his senior year, he had 2 more concussions. Again, 1 from football and 1 from soccer. Unfortunately, the football injury was his last regular season game of the year, and he was knocked out. And by the time he came to, he actually went to the wrong huddle. That's how scrambled his brain was. And, of course, they called a timeout and pulled him off the field. And the protocol back then, it just wasn't very steeped in science. Get a note from your doctor and he can return. And my wife, Mary, and I thought that didn't make much sense. So we went with the longer form of protocol, and that was you sat out with no activity for 2 weeks.
Right.
So 2 weeks later, it's his last soccer game of the season. And of course, he goes up for a head ball and he gets knocked out. And unfortunately, that's a bruise on top of a bruise. That's called second impact syndrome. And that's really a tough spiral to get out of. So he dealt with concussion related issues from that point forward. And we're talking about 2009, 2010.
Okay.
So that
Oh,
that
sorry, go
that
ahead.
no, that's pretty much how it happened. What was the impetus of his spiraling?
Right. And during that time, I know you were saying that like, back then the conversation around concussions were pretty limited, like just a few weeks like off the field for you and your wife's standards, right? But it's just as something as simple as a doctor's note. Was that's kind of like the extent of the conversation around concussions at that time?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. So um, you know, while concussions are common in high school sports, for teens they tend to be more concussed from motor vehicle accidents, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
And so my knowledge of concussions quickly expanded in 2012, believe it or not, because
Mm-hmm.
that's when John's little sister, Leah, was involved in a car accident on the way to high school one morning early in her sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
And Leah was the only person in that accident who was rushed to the hospital. In
Mm.
fact, the driver who had T-boned their car, he had run a red light, and the reason he ran a red light is because he died by a heart attack.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
awful.
yeah, so the ER had misdiagnosed Leah and sent her home.
Mm-hmm.
But early the next week, the school called us just like an hour or two into the beginning of the school day and said, "You guys need to get here right away," because the school nurse had detected that Leah was concussed.
Oh,
And
wow.
she said, "You need to get her back to the ER immediately."
Mhm.
And so it wasn't long afterwards that the school suggested that we remove Leah from her high school and place her in some treatment for her
Mm.
concussion, as well as for the balance of at least the semester, maybe the entire year,
Mhm.
seek special education assistance until she was ready to return. And that process did almost take a full year. It was to the following
Oh, wow.
September. Yeah. So in the meantime, little John had heard that his baby sister had gotten this car accident, and he
Mhm.
dropped everything and told mom, hey, you need to drop everything and take care of Peanut. That's what he called her. You need to take care of her
Mhm.
because you have no idea what these concussions have done to my life. So that was like
Right.
the first time he had ever mentioned, the impact, the ongoing, lingering impact of his four high school that we know of football and soccer concussions.
Mhm.
Um, it probably wasn't until late 2016 that he mentioned something again to me.
Okay.
Interesting, the following summer in 2013, I was at a conference and I had some time
Mhm.
to kill between sessions, and they had a library at this community college I was at. So I ducked into the library, and lo and behold, there's a book. And they had like a new book rack, a book rack of all new books, and maybe
Yeah.
5 or 10 books on it. And one of them was on sports concussions.
Oh,
So
wow.
I picked it up and started reading about a chapter of it before my next session started. Um, this really opened my eyes to how severe and concussions can be on a human,
Mhm.
and it pushed me to be more proactive in her care. And the irony is, later on, I'm sure we'll get to it, but in 2017, after John died, I had realized I connected the dots that one of the authors of that book was also one of the
Mhm.
researchers who's considered a pioneer in the Boston area with the Concussion Legacy Foundation.
Oh, wow.
So that's so Leah was concussed, then John was concussed multiple times, and then believe it or
Mhm.
not, I was 2 days before Thanksgiving 2 years ago in
Mhm.
2023.
Mhm.
I was running some errands and a guy ran a red light and hit me head on. And
Oh,
until
wow.
that point, Mariah, I never knew my car had four airbags. Well, I found out that day because they all went off. He totaled my
Oh.
car, um, and I was in concussion protocol myself
Mhm.
until just February of this year. So over a year and a half of treatment. So
Right.
yeah, my world has been impacted negatively by concussions more than once, and by more than one of us in the family.
Yeah. Interesting. Absolutely. It's interesting to hear like how much the knowledge has already ramped, like from like John's original concussion where like you were saying it was just that doctor's note, to all of this research and all of this extra care just like 5 or so odd years later. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I say this to groups all the time when I speak. I said,
Mhm.
what we know about concussions today versus March of 2017, we're light years beyond that, truly.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
because a lot of old methods are not prescribed anymore. A lot of times they said no screens and darkness and no loud noise. Well,
Right.
everything is probably not good in overdoses. So right, so
Yeah.
uh, we try to limit screen time. We try to limit bright lights, loud sounds, and things of that nature. But if you look
Yeah.
at the protocol today, some of them are recommending after 2 or 3 days of that
Mhm.
rest to actually
Mhm.
start beginning some physical activity, ramping
Okay.
up into it. And the reason being is that blood flow to your brain helps regenerate your brain. So I believe they call it the Buffalo Protocol.
Mm.
That really gets into that.
Hmm. Interesting. And you mentioned, so John hadn't mentioned anything to you in a number of years. So when he brought it back up again, you said around in 2016. What did that look like?
Yeah. So he had graduated college in May of 15, and
Hmm.
he went back to the area where his college was stationed after the summer to get a job and start stashing away some money because he was going to go to grad school in that area.
Yeah.
And he chose to work in the state mental health institution,
Mm.
and I think that was not good for his mental health. He thought it made a lot of sense to get the bump in pay to work the night shift. And we know a lot about working night shifts and how that impacts mental health. But on
Hmm.
top of that, he got another bump because he worked the section for the criminally mentally impaired. And
Okay.
so he saw things that probably, most people should not be exposed to, especially in light of his mental health at the time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
And
so at the end of 2016, he was back home, and I came home after a meeting. I picked up a pamphlet. It was for a graduate degree in social work, and I brought it. And I got home, and he was shoveling the snow off the driveway, and we stopped and chatted in the driveway. And I said, "Hey, I found this pamphlet. It's got your name written all over it," because he just had that kind of a heart and mind. And I probably got about 10 feet away. He said, "Hey, Papa," he said, and I turned back. He said, "Thanks for getting this." He said, "But I need to fix myself before I go do something like this." And I walked back over to him, and told him, "Yeah, I'm there with you." And so that really, yeah, I think he started to see the wheels falling off the bus at that point.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and for those like, who don't already know John Jr.'s story, he died in 2017. Um, he took his life. He committed suicide, or I'm not sure what the current verbiage is here.
They,
Yeah.
we are trying to get more and more people to move from the word commit, because
Okay.
often when they hear that, they think of a crime or a sin because of our
Oh
culture,
yes.
right? Our history and culture, right?
Sure.
So we try to move to a person first, type of language. So we say died by suicide, something along
Okay.
those lines.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for letting us know.
No,
And
I'm not here. I'm not the language. I'm not the language police, but you've got a great platform here, and it's a great time. It's a teaching moment.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it, and yeah, so sorry for your loss. But would love to talk about like the resources available to you and your family at that time.
Yeah. So I'd have to tell you, at that time, uh, to put it bluntly, it was slim to none. Um,
Oh,
so, but let's have a little caveat here. No parent expects such a tragedy to hit their family, and the depth of such a tragedy is not one I would wish even on my worst enemy. Um,
yeah.
because like most of us, I tended to believe back then that stuff like that happened to other families, not ours.
Yeah.
And we have certainly seen how that has changed people's lives with respect to the opioid crisis, and how it goes across, all sorts of socioeconomic, barriers.
Mhm.
So, fortunately, in a sense, my in laws had a long history with an organization called NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, because their son, my brother in law, has schizophrenia. And so we knew there was somewhere to turn to, not necessarily for suicide in particular, but for mental health at least. And
Oh,
so we turned to them. And then as I dug deeper, I found other organizations like AFSP, which is American
mm,
Foundation for Suicide Prevention, spoke more closely to what we were faced with. And I'd have to say by 2018, just a mere year or so later, year and a half later,
mhm.
the AGC of Missouri, that's the Associated General Contractors here. So I'm from the construction field. So, I had 40 plus years in construction.
Yeah.
So the AGC is one of the management associations here. They actually launched a work group to address the suicide epidemic in the construction industry. And I was brought on to that work group as an advisor. And
Amazing.
soon thereafter, Washington University School of Medicine, their researchers had secured a grant
Mhm.
to help fund and study the matter of suicide in construction. So
Mm.
this was pretty much a natural fit for WashU School of Medicine because I had been working with them since the early 2000s on other
Mhm.
aspects of safety. When we first started, it was mostly the physical aspects of safety, but later on, we moved more into the mental aspects of safety. So prior to this, this issue with suicide in 2018, in 2016, I had worked with them to start studying the issue of the opioid crisis in construction. So it
Oh,
was
okay.
kind of a natural fit because I
Mhm.
always look at things in threes. And to me, I don't know how someone can talk about the suicide crisis in construction without talking about mental health. And if you talk about health, you almost have to talk about the opioid crisis. So it's,
Right.
it's a three-legged stool. So more particular to our incident, I would say in those first 48 hours, lost survivors are in such a deep state of shock and disbelief. Some may be angry, some may be shamed, whatever it may
Yeah.
be. We really didn't know where to turn and who to turn to.
Right.
So my advice here is, having someone to lean on and to listen to, our concerns, our issues that have popped up, that would have helped enormously.
Mhm.
I do have to, tip my hat to, you know, the caring family and friends and neighbors and coworkers that showed us all sorts of love during that time frame. But
Yeah.
it is something that really got me to thinking for quite some time. I
Yeah.
didn't think about it again until 4 years later. And on a Saturday night, Mariah, when things just started to settle a little bit, my
Mhm.
wife and my youngest daughter, we sat down to watch a movie on a Saturday night. And about 20 after 7 that evening, my phone starts blowing up. And
Mhm.
I looked down and I saw it was someone I know, but my goodness, he rarely calls me during the week and never calls me on the weekends. So I knew it had to be something important. So I excused myself out of the room, went to the next room, and lo and behold, he had shared with me that earlier that day, his son had died by suicide.
Oh,
And
awful.
his his words were, John, I don't know who else to call because you're the only parent I know who has lost a child to suicide. Can you just sit and talk with me?
Yeah.
And of course, you don't say no. You got to say yes. I was in that spot. I don't want anyone else ever to be in that spot.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I basically sat and listened and interjected when I could, during that hour. And one of the
Mhm.
last things I said to him is, I'm not going to call you tomorrow. And I didn't want to feel like he was a man without a country because I know that feeling.
Right.
But I tell you what I will do. I'll call you on Monday. And he's like, oh, okay. And we kind of left it at that. And I basically said, well, the reason I won't call you tomorrow is because you're going to have people calling you, friends and family members that you may have not have heard from in 10 or 15 years.
Right. Yeah.
So lo and behold, I waited to that Monday afternoon, called him, and he was so grateful, just so grateful. Because I didn't know what to expect. I mean, you say the corny stuff like, how are you? How do you think, how do you
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he is? But I said, I don't know what other way to say it,
Mhm.
and he's like, no, I understand. He said, let me tell you, I can't thank you enough. He said, you gave us resources
Mhm.
that we tapped into. So my kids are seeing X next week. I'm seeing Y, and my wife is seeing Z. So that
Right.
they were able to at least find some support there, and
Mhm.
that's what I thought that we had lacking. Those first 48 hours just so tough. You're just in a tailspin,
Yeah.
and yeah. So that that weighed on me, and I thought about it since, and that was in 21.
Mhm.
And then Mariah, believe it or not, last year, from
Yeah.
the end of July of 2024 to the end of October, during those 12 weeks, I took 8 more of those calls,
Oh, wow.
8 more of those suicide calls. And being an academic researcher,
Mhm.
I said, this is it's prime time to do something about this and quit thinking about it and start taking action.
Yeah.
And so I started down a pathway of a study of
Mhm.
how to address the acute phase of postvention in the
Right.
construction industry. Because honestly, Mariah, those people weren't calling. Those 8 people didn't call me and say, "Hey, John, what do I do 3 weeks from now? What do I
Yeah.
do 3 months
Exactly.
from now? What do I do 3 years from now?" They weren't asking me. They were asking, "What do I do right now?"
Right.
And so that put the wheels in motion. And
Mhm.
hopefully, before the end of this year, I will have submitted a journal article for peer review. That's my goal. And then in 26, spend time rolling out the action part of the research findings in there.
Right, absolutely. Well, we're going to get into the postvention and the lack of resources there and what you're working on in a bit. I'm so glad that you had the support system you did, and I'm so glad that you're able to kind of trickle out what you had to the people close to you in similar situations. I would love to touch on in a little bit of my research, John. I found out that, and reading a few of your articles or articles about you and, John Jr.'s story that you didn't discourage, like, other families to pull their kids out of sports, and I just thought that was, like, might be surprising to people, but an unexpected bright spot in the story. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, sadly, I guess I let my ego get in the way because when John came to me and said, "Hey, they're going to let me play 2 sports," as a dad, I was like, "Cool,"
Mm,
and more importantly, I had the opportunity to play college soccer, so I knew what that was like. And furthermore, his little brother was starting high school, and he was good enough that he could make those varsity teams. And as a dad, I would be really proud to see my two boys on the same football and same soccer, fields together. And
Yeah.
eventually I got to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
But, we paid a pretty heavy price for that. Honestly, if you'd asked me would I do it differently? No, because that was John Jr.'s stage. That's where he excelled.
Right.
But, as we said earlier, we know so much more about traumatic brain injuries or TBIs.
Mm-hmm.
We know so much more about CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, today than we did a decade ago.
Right.
In fact, researchers back when John had passed were focused on concussions. Today, that focus has shifted to what we call RHIs, repetitive head impacts.
Oh.
So it's the number of times you get jostled, not the number of times you get concussed. So new times, new rules, right? We have to take that in consideration too, because look at some of the, most of the pro football teams and some of the college teams, and I think that's going to filter down to the high school and peewee sooner than later.
Right.
They don't do full pad practices that much anymore, because think about it. If you're practicing 5 times a week and you only have 1 game a week, there's 5 more times chance that you're going to get concussed in practice than you are in a game. So why do full pad practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's better techniques, tackling techniques. There's better equipment. And there's updated protocols. When we pull some off the field, there's often a medical professional there to try to determine whether that person can return to play or not. Does it always work? No, but you know what? Again, we're better than we were in 2009 and 2010. Just think about how youth soccer has changed. I don't know about in your area, Mariah, but in my area, it is not allowed. You're not allowed to head the ball in soccer until you're 12 or older.
Okay.
Because we understand the developing brain. I'm not even sure 12 is a good number because we know in men, young men, their brain doesn't technically fully, form until 25. But again, it's better than nothing at all. And, in addition, I'm not a big fan of tackle football under the age of 14. So I fully support the Concussion Legacies Foundation, their effort to push flag football before the age of 14. I think that's a great idea. There's a kind of another caveat for you. Believe it or not, John Jr.'s cousin, Jamie Gaal, she's the current starting quarterback and one of the team captains for the St. Louis Slam.
Oh, no way.
This is a pro women's tackle football league across the United States. And in 2024 and 2025, they won back-to-back national championships. So I'm very proud of her. So I'm not trying to discourage, people from playing soccer or football, but just know as parents, you're the guardian of your children's lives when they're young. You have this information you're armed with now. Make wise decisions. That's all I'm asking you.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a hard stop, but there are ways we can do better in these things all the time. And I think that's a beautiful message. Before getting into your career here, John, just one more piece about John Jr.'s story. What part did organ donation play in John Jr.'s story?
Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate, in my eyes, John was a giver. He wasn't a taker. So when we were in the ER that morning of March 24th in 2017, I had requested that they harvested John's organs because I knew he would be upset if others couldn't benefit from those gifts. And the ER doctor said none of his organs were viable due to the means. And I pushed back because like I said earlier, I'd done some research on this stuff, not for John, but, in case of, the situation with Leah had gone in a different direction. And I pushed back and I said, I know of at least one organ that you can harvest. And she stepped back and said, which one? And I said, his brain.
Mm-hmm.
And she left the room and came back with papers for us to sign in order to donate not just his brain, but his eyes and his spinal cord.
Oh, wow.
And so this began the journey to determine if John Jr. had CTE. So, for your guests, just, as a nicety, CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is a progressive degenerative brain disease that's often caused by repeated head impacts and is found in many athletes and veterans. And to date, CTE can only be detected posthumously, so only after they die.
Mm.
So the paperwork she brought back was for the Concussion Legacy Foundation that partners with Boston University. And the lead researcher there is Dr. Ann McKee.
Mm-hmm.
And so she has worked with many of families of pro athletes who have taken their lives.
Right.
Some of the popular names that you may be familiar with, like Junior Seau and Aaron Hernandez and Dave Dewerson, Mike Webster. These people were all eventually identified with CTE. She's worked with a number of those names I just mentioned with their families. So this was a double-blind study. So what
Mm-hmm.
they do is the clinical people take the brain and study it under microscope. And then another group does a psychological autopsy. So
Okay.
Mary and I sat through no less than 3 interviews, phone interviews that lasted anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, because they're
Right.
trying to connect the dots between all these people, who've died by suicide and were eventually diagnosed with CTE.
Mm-hmm.
On December the 16th of 2017, we got the call from the Concussion Legacy Foundation to inform us that John Jr. had stage 1 CTE. And Mariah, at the time, he was one of the youngest high school football players in the nation to be diagnosed with CTE.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing it and letting the viewers know. I know it's not common knowledge, but that's why we're here to talk about the story and the resources and the knowledge after the fact. But kind of changing gears here, John, and getting into connecting it more into the construction or the AEC space. For those who don't know, what was your career before John passed, and how has it changed since he passed?
Oh, for the better part of 40 years, I served as the Director of Training and Workforce Development for the St. Louis Kansas City Carpenters Regional Council. So I am a carpenter by trade. I went through an apprenticeship back in the late 70s, early 80s. Towards the end there, I retired technically in February of 2019. And towards the end there, I was overseeing 9 USDOL approved post-secondary carpenter apprenticeship training schools across
Oh,
3
wow.
states. There were 6 in Missouri, 2 in Kansas, and 1 in Southern Illinois. My work, as far as how John's story shaped my work, I would say that my efforts in mental health actually started long before even Leah was concussed. So
Mhm.
we're going back into the Great Recession. So towards the end of the Great Recession, I had
Yeah.
instructors on my shop floor telling me that they're seeing different things about their apprentices. And
Mm.
I was taking that in and testing it some myself. And essentially, it wasn't the physical aspects of safety; it was the mental aspects of safety. We were
Right.
finding people who were saying that, "Hey, I just lost my job," and then we'd see them a couple months later in school, and next thing you know, they lost their truck, and then a couple months later, you pull them aside and have a private conversation. They lost their house or their family. It was just a downward spiral. So I went back to those WashU researchers and said, "Hey, I think it's time we start studying the mental aspects of safety, not just focus on the physical aspects of safety." And they moved in that
Right.
direction. And so that was very helpful. And during that time, I was introduced to a gentleman by the name of Bill Wilkerson. Bill Wilkerson is a Canadian mental health expert He came to St. Louis to speak on the issue of mental health in the workplace.
Right.
And so a colleague of mine had hosted the event. Unfortunately, not many attended. However, I recall my colleague writing an article concerning the event, and
Mm-hmm.
it's always stuck with me. He summed it up perfectly by asking his readers, "What do you call it when you invite over 9,000 people to a mental health and construction presentation and only 12 show up?"
Yeah.
And
Wow.
his answer to himself was a start. And I thought that was so positive. You know, you could have been real negative about that, but he was so positive about it. It was fantastic. So I would say a couple of years later, in March of 2016, a high
Mm-hmm.
school friend of mine and an industry colleague lost his 36-year-old son to an opioid overdose.
Mm-hmm.
And as a trained carpenter, I'm a fixer.
Right.
So about a month after his son had passed away, I went to him and asked how I might be of help.
Yeah.
Because honestly, my mind just could not grasp being a parent and losing a child. I just couldn't grasp that, you know.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
just told him, I said, you know, it would be remiss of me to allow you to walk this journey by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, listen, I can't change the past, but we, the two of us, sure in the hell, can impact the future.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
we went on kind of an opioid crusade. So for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of 2016, every month, he and I went to either a workshop, a conference, or a summit on opioids
Yeah.
in the workplace, in the community, at school, whatever it was. I mean, I've
Wow.
learned things there, Mariah, that I couldn't even make up. You know,
Yeah.
it was pretty far flung stuff. So, as we mentioned earlier, shortly thereafter, in March of 2017,
Mm-hmm.
my son John Jr. died by suicide, and Don came to me and said, "Hey, you walked with me last year. Now it's my time to walk with you."
Oh, what a friend.
Yep. So here's a bit of irony.
Mm-hmm.
This is about the same time that the CDC released 2016 data
Mm-hmm.
that said the construction sector was number one when it came to opioid misuse, and number two when it came to suicide.
Yeah.
So this data provided the two of us with the science to couple with our personal losses, our personal stories, and it allowed us to open doors on both labor and management side of the table throughout our industry. So when I retired in February 19, I knew the work was only beginning. You know, we had just put a dent in it, and so I couldn't walk away. So I
Sure.
took a number of training courses related to mental health first aid,
Mm-hmm.
QPR. I became a certified peer specialist. I became a certified community health worker, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I also consulted on two big projects with regards to opioid use disorder
Oh,
and
wow.
how do you bring workers safely back on into the office, into the shop, into the job site, called recovery friendly workplaces. So
Mm-hmm.
I worked on one specifically for the construction industry with Washington University and
Mm-hmm.
concurrently with the University of Missouri Extension. But we looked at all industries, whether they were union or non-union, across the entire state. And so we came up with a recovery-friendly program. And then in March of 21, the Missouri AFL-CIO created a nonprofit known as the Missouri Works Initiative, and they asked me if I would serve as a director of the worker wellness program. And again, I
Right.
just couldn't turn it down. It was such a pioneering concept that
Yeah.
I wanted to be a part of it. And then, so, for several years now, I also might add that I've served on the mental health expert panel for the IFEBP. They're the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans.
Okay.
And in late, let's see, just about 2 years ago, in late 2023, I earned my labor assistance professional certification. So
Mm.
I tried to stay up on my learning and education and certifications, so that
Yep.
I'm not on a stage or on a podcast purely speaking from an emotional standpoint.
Right.
I'm speaking from a scientific standpoint as well. I think it
Right.
helps when you can back it with the science and then back that with a personal story.
Yep. Absolutely. I see what you mean about the work only getting started. That was quite the understatement. Oh my goodness. Would love to hear about the for those who don't know, the 2114 Concussion Awareness Foundation and how that came to be.
Well, yeah, I've said it more than once already. I'm a fixer, and I just saw a gap here that we
Yep.
needed to fill.
Hmm.
Um, Seeing what John's suicide death did to our family and in our community, to me, served as a call to action. Both Mary and I felt no parent should ever have to go through this kind of an experience. I am extremely grateful that when I earned my doctorate back in 2007, the
Hmm.
St. Louis construction industry was mindful and kind enough to start a scholarship in my honor.
Wow.
So the structure was already there, Mariah.
Yeah.
So we leveraged that program
Mhm.
to begin the 2114 Concussion Awareness Foundation. So the 21, that represents John's football number back in high school, and the 14 represents his soccer number in high school. We support an array of projects and nonprofits that address mental health, substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, as well as suicide for various groups, from construction to schools to
Hmm.
veterans. Because, as you know, a good part of the construction industry, upwards of 10%, is made up of veterans. So
Yeah.
um, that's really important to us.
Yeah.
So that's it in a kind of a nutshell. What we do.
That's great.
We
That's
support
beautiful. I didn't.
research.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't
Um,
realize that so much of your career before John Jr.'s passing really kind of set you up for this continued work. Like I didn't realize like it went so far back, but that's beautiful that you're able to do as much as you do. Diving into like the work in the construction industry, I'm sure our viewers know that it's no surprise that it has one of the highest suicide rates. What are some of the misconceptions you would say, John, about like people who are depressed or they're in a crisis? Like what are we getting wrong about what that looks like?
yeah. Well, sadly, stigma is alive and continues to flourish in spite of all our efforts.
Yeah.
But if we don't do anything, stigma grows in that silence. So we got to keep talking about it. So I really appreciate you guys doing this, because it's just one of those ways to create the transparency that we need to break down those barriers.
Yeah.
Because for people my age, it was common to use the phrase, as we talked about earlier, committed suicide. But
Mhm.
nowadays,
Right.
we do encourage that person first language. Um, and I am glad that the younger generation is really pushing back against the traditional historical establishment and forcing the issue to be front and center. I'm
Right.
proud of what they're doing.
Yeah. The kids are all right.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. I'm with you. And so what does for companies, people on the job sites or people in leadership, what does effective suicide prevention look like?
Well, I would say I think we need to take a step back. I think effective suicide prevention must connect all three legs of what I call the suicide triangle. So think
Mhm.
of one leg being prevention, one
Yeah.
leg being intervention, and one leg being postvention. So we need, really to make every effort to get education about how these three are interconnected.
Right.
And I tip my hat to different organizations like AFSP, They have what I call an awareness/prevention program called Talk Saves Lives, and
Mm-hmm.
they've got variations of it. For years, they've had one for the general public. Back in May, they created one specifically for construction. I think next week they've got one coming up for veterans because of Veterans Day. So they've done a really good job. And these are 1 hour trainings. We're not asking you to go through a semester course. This is one
Right.
hour of your life, right?
Yep.
Just to get educated on the topic of prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I lump prevention in the awareness category because that's
Right.
knowledge about a topic.
Sure.
Intervention to me is what do you do when you see something, right? So thanks to QPR has an institute. QPR stands question, persuade, refer. So in their
Okay.
title alone, it indicates you're intervening, right? You're doing something. So once you
Yeah.
see those warning signs you learned about in the prevention phase,
Mm-hmm.
we can use the training from QPR in the intervention phase. And
Right.
it's called QPR as a play on the concept of CPR. When
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Paul Quinnett designed the program, he basically said, well, if you can have lay people save someone from a heart attack using CPR, why can't we have lay people step in and help people in need when it comes to suicidal ideation? And that's why
Yeah.
he called it QPR. And then the
Wow.
third leg of that triangle, is postvention.
Mm-hmm.
And just a couple months ago, AFSP came up with a 1 hour training program called Caring Communities. I highly recommend it. I think it's really important for people to understand that lost survivors they need help. They shouldn't be left out there on their own.
Yep.
But sadly, what we've seen is most of the funding goes into prevention. Some of it
Mm-hmm.
goes into intervention, but most of it goes into prevention. My other part of
Right.
the comment is when it comes to prevention, if that's all we continue to focus on, then we've got an issue because if you look at the numbers, they're not going down; they're
Right.
going up.
Exactly. Yep.
So until we connect these three legs,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see the numbers continue to go up. We need to talk about these together and not
Yep.
in silos, for a lack of better words.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to my next point that more funding needs to be funneled towards the concept of postvention.
Yep.
Because even some of the most famous suicidologists, those people who study suicide,
Mm-hmm.
they proclaim that postvention is prevention.
Wow.
So if that's the case, then what are we waiting for?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. That's great. So, what can businesses in the AEC community or industry do tomorrow to start doing better?
I would say they need to look at how they can become involved locally. There are a number of organizations that work in this space, and they have expertise often in general population, not so much specific to construction, but
Right.
more and more of them are starting to see that, and they're adapting their programs. As I mentioned earlier, Talk Saves Lives has a couple of versions. Well, QPR now has a version for the general public, has it for first responders, it has it for construction, and they've gone down deep enough that they have a version for iron workers now.
Oh.
So it's pretty interesting. Because our industry is still pretty much male dominated. I mean, I looked at BLS stats just a couple months ago, and I think it's still 89% male dominated.
Yep.
You know, this macho culture has been instilled in young boys, from the time they were toddlers. It's reinforced in high school and then again in the military.
Yep.
So I think we got a lot of work to do in that area of stigma and shame.
Yeah.
Because most men, I hate to generalize, but I would, if you had them one on one, they would tell you they'd probably be a little bit ashamed to talk about mental health because often our culture has taught us that that's a sign of weakness.
Right.
And I think, one of the neatest things I saw maybe 2 years ago. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month,
Yeah.
and there was a standing general
Mm-hmm.
in the Army that came out and said he is seeing a therapist.
Oh,
Can you imagine the message that sends to the people all the way to the bottom of the pyramid?
oh,
You
that's
know, if it's
amazing.
okay for him to do it, it's okay for me to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just as
Yeah.
simple as representation like that. Sometimes it's all it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think places to reach out to would be, and most of these have websites, CIASP.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. They got some great stuff on their website. CPWR, that is the research arm of the North American Building Trade Unions, the AFL-CIO. They have some fabulous reports on mental health, on suicide, on opioids. They do some great work as well. If you want to see how something works in a local area, I would say Google Lean, Lean,
Mm-hmm.
and that stands for Laborers Escaping Adversity Now. And
Okay.
put lean in St. Louis, and put something like St. Louis Public Radio, and you'll see a link to a recent podcast back in August,
Mm-hmm.
of how one of the trades here has really been a pioneer in this area. They pulled two people out of the field who had
Yeah.
20 years of experience, but they also had more than 5 years of sobriety, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
We brought them
Okay.
in, and we sent them through different types of training. Number of the trainings you heard me mention earlier, like certified peer specialists, certified
Right.
community health worker,
Mm.
and they are on call 24/7 to their 11,000 members and their families with
Wow.
regards to any kind of mental health crisis that they may be experiencing.
Yeah.
And the way they measure success is they've seen their mental health claims go up
Right.
40% in
Wow.
their health insurance area. So
Right.
this means they're making connections, and the people are following through with getting help. And
Yeah.
and so, you know, and I think that, the one that you and I and everyone has access to is 988.
Mm-hmm.
The number 988. It's often headlined as the National Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Crisis Lifeline or helpline or something like that. I would love for us to not wait for things to become a crisis, because I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of people understand that whether you call or you text 988, the bottom line is you've got a mental health professional on the other end of that call or text.
Yeah.
So essentially, you have access to free advice. So why
Mm-hmm.
are we waiting till things are spilling over the bowl? Let's
Right.
get them when they're just touching the bottom of the bowl.
Uh,
And I often say to construction workers, how many of you work 10 minutes from work? Well, hardly anybody does anymore. Most of them work 40 to 50 minutes away from work. So you got 40 to 50 minutes either on your drive to work or your drive home that you could be sitting with your own personal counselor by calling 988 and
yeah.
utilizing that service. I mean, and
True.
you don't have to use it just for yourself. You
Right.
may see something odd on the job site or at home that you don't quite understand. Well, you can do it in the
Yeah.
privacy of your own car on that drive to work, or or from work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are just a couple of tips. That I would say that we could start immediately.
Yeah.
There's a number of great resources out there, and I
Mm-hmm.
think once you spill into one, you spill into 5 or 6 others, and it just keeps cascading.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm energized by that answer, John, because I'm so happy to see. Like, I know we have a long way to go, but it's so
Yeah.
beautiful to see how far we've come with this stuff. For those who are just watching, everything that John has mentioned about links and resources and learning and education, we're going to link in the full article. So take a look if you haven't already. But in the last question here for you, John, is if people wanted to connect with you or get involved with the 2114 Concussion Awareness Foundation, where's the best place to get in touch?
Yeah. So from the 2114 CAF side, from a more personal standpoint, they could reach out to me. They could go to the website. It's www.2114caf.org. And you can find a means to connect with me there. There's a
Great.
an email address available that
Mhm.
connects to my personal email. Personally, professionally, you can reach me at jgaal at mowrks.org. So jgaal at moworks.org.
That's great. And stay tuned, I would say, viewers, for the next episode here in the mini series. We're going to get more into the three legs there of suicide and pre, inter, and postvention. And like your friend said about that first talk with the 12 people showing up, it's a start. We love the beautiful work you're doing here on the topic and for the community, the construction industry and beyond, John. It's just amazing. We'll see you in the next one, my friends.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Of course. Bye bye.
Bye bye.